I should have known something was wrong the moment I saw the ad. Night clerk wanted, no experience necessary, high pay, cash only. That last part stood out. Nobody pays in cash anymore, and definitely not at the rate that they were offering, 3 times what a normal graveyard shift job would pay. But I was desperate. Rent was overdue. My car was on the verge of breaking down, and my fridge was as empty as my bank account. The motel sat on the outskirts of town, a crumbling relic from the 70s, barely visible from the highway. The neon sign flickered erratically, buzzing like a dying insect. Moonlight Motel, it read, though half the letters were burnt out. It looked abandoned, but as I pulled into the cracked parking lot, I saw a single light glowing from the office window. Inside, the air was thick with the stench of mildew and something else. Something metallic like rust or blood. Behind the desk sat a man who looked like he hadn't slept in years. His skin was pale, almost translucent under the flickering fluorescent lights, and his eyes were sunken, shallowed by deep circles. "You here for the job?" His voice was flat, emotionless. I hesitated before nodding. He pushed a set of keys across the desk. "You start tonight?" "No interview?" "Not necessary." I should have walked out right then, but the weight of my empty wallet kept me rooted to the spot. I swallowed my unease. "Any rules?" The man's gaze darkened. His lips barely moved as he spoke. "Never question the guests." A chill crawled up my spine. I wanted to ask what he meant, but something in his expression told me I wouldn't like the answer. Instead, I nodded, took the keys, and stepped behind the counter. The man stood up and grabbed his coat. "I'll be back at dawn. Don't leave the office. Don't talk too much. And whatever you see on the cameras, ignore it." Before I could respond, he was gone, leaving me alone in the dim, humming silence of the Moonlight Motel. And that was the beginning of the longest night of my life. At first, the shift was quiet. Too quiet. The only sound was the steady ticking of the old wall clock and the occasional gusts of wind rattling the windows. I busied myself organizing the scattered papers on the desk, trying to ignore the peeling wallpaper and the faint smell of something rotten wafting from the vents. The guest log sat open in front of me. I flipped through the pages. Something was off. The names were strange. Some were illegible, written in symbols I didn't recognize. Others were just initials, or single words like Mr. White or Mother. And then there were the dates. The most recent check-in was 3 days ago. No checkouts. Before that? A week? 2 weeks? A month? Pages and pages of guests arriving, but never leaving. A shiver crept up my spine. The bell above the office door jingled, and I nearly jumped out of my chair. A man stood in the doorway. At least, I thought it was a man. His face was wrong. Something about the way the shadows fell across it made it seem like his features were shifting, like his mouth and nose weren't quite where they should be. His suit was too clean, too crisp, like it had just been ironed moments before. He didn't blink. "I need a room," he said. His voice didn't match his lips. There was a lag, like a badly dubbed movie. I forced a smile, pretending not to notice. "Sure, how many nights?" He tilted his head slightly. "Just the one." A lie. I knew that now. I handed him a key, trying not to let my fingers touch his as he took it. His skin was ice cold. Without another word, he turned and walked toward the hallway. His footsteps were off, too slow, too deliberate, like he was mimicking how a person should walk, but not quite getting it right. I watched him disappear into the shadows of the motel's dimly lit corridor. I should have ignored the cameras like the manager said, but I didn't. I turned to the monitor, watching the grainy black and white feed of the hallway outside room number 6, where the man had just gone. He stood in front of the door, motionless. Seconds passed, then minutes. He didn't move. Then, all at once, the screen flickered with static. And when the image returned, the man was staring directly into the camera. His face was too close, stretched unnaturally across the screen, as if he knew I was watching. And then, he smiled. Not a normal smile, not a human smile. It was too wide, stretching from ear to ear, his teeth long and needle-like, gleaming in the flickering light. I slammed the monitor off. I didn't sleep at all that night. And when dawn came, the man was gone. But the key to room 6 was on my desk, untouched. The second night felt heavier. I hadn't slept after what I saw on the cameras. Even in the daylight, the motel felt wrong. The air was stale, too still, like it hadn't been disturbed in years. When I arrived for my shift, the manager barely acknowledged me. He sat in the office for a few minutes, staring at the wall before muttering, "You stayed. Good." Then he left, leaving me alone with whatever the hell was lurking in this place. The night started slow. I spent the first few hours flipping through the old guest logs, trying to make sense of the bizarre entries. I found names that had been repeated over and over across different years, decades even. Mr. White, Mother H, Carter H, Carter H, Carter. The same names, the same rooms, but always new dates. The wind howled outside. The walls groaned like they were breathing. Then, around 2 a.m., the noise started. A faint scratching coming from inside the vents. At first, I tried to ignore it. Rats, I told myself. Or maybe just the old pipes settling. But the sound grew louder, more deliberate. It wasn't just random scurrying. It was pacing. A slow, dragging movement, like something was crawling just beneath the surface. I turned up the tiny radio on the desk, trying to drown it out. That's when the phone rang. The motel phone, the one that had been silent all night. I picked it up, hesitant. Front desk. Static. Then a voice, faint and whispering. "Help me." My voice caught in my throat. Who is this? Silence. And then, thump. The sound came from inside the vent, just above my head. I stumbled back, heart hammering. Dust trickled from the metal grates. Whatever was inside was right there, pressing against the thin barrier. The metal creaked, bending outward slightly, as if something was pushing from the other side. I grabbed the flashlight from the desk and aimed it at the vent. Who's in there? No answer. Just breathing, shallow, ragged breathing. And then, slowly, something moved. A shadow shifted behind the grate. A long, pale hand with fingers too many and too thin slipped through one of the gaps. It twitched, stretching unnaturally, grasping at the air. I staggered back. What the hell? And then bang! The vent dented outward, as if whatever was inside had thrown itself against it. I didn't wait to see what happened next. I grabbed the office door handle, ready to run, but then, just as suddenly as it started, the noise stopped. I stood there frozen, barely breathing. Minutes passed. The air was thick, oppressive. The vent remained still. And then, the phone rang again. I picked it up with a shaking hand. Static. And then the voice closer this time. "Don't look at them." Click. The line went dead. I nearly quit that night. But when dawn came, the manager returned as if nothing had happened. He didn't ask why my hands were shaking, didn't ask why the vent was dented, or why I had unplugged the security cameras. He just dropped an envelope of cash on the desk and said, "See you tonight." And, like an idiot, I showed up again. The third night felt worse. The motel seemed darker, the air heavier. The lights flickered more than usual. The neon sign outside buzzed like a dying fly, barely illuminating the lot. And the guests, they were watching me. They didn't talk. Not really. They'd come in, ask for a room in voices that barely sounded human, and disappear into the hall. I avoided eye contact, keeping my head down, pretending not to notice the way their faces shifted when they moved. Then, around midnight, she arrived. A woman. She was different from the others. She looked normal. Her face didn't change when I blinked. Her movements were smooth, natural. She had deep, sunken eyes, and her dark hair hung in wet strands over her face like she had just stepped out of a storm. She leaned in close when she spoke. "Please, I need a room." Her voice was hoarse, desperate. I hesitated. "How many nights?" Her hand clamped over mine, ice cold. "Just one." The same lie they all told. I gave her the key to room 9. She didn't thank me, didn't even look at it. She just snatched it from my hand and hurried down the hallway, glancing over her shoulder as if something were following her. I watched her on the cameras. Unlike the others, she didn't just stand in front of her door. She locked it and bolted it, pushed the dresser in front of it. Then she sat on the bed, knees pulled to her chest, eyes glued to the door. I don't know why, but I felt compelled to check on her. Maybe because she seemed scared. Maybe because she seemed real. I grabbed the master key and made my way down the hall. The motel felt suffocating, like the walls were pressing in. Every door I passed felt wrong, like something was breathing on the other side. When I reached room 9, I knocked softly. "Ma'am, everything okay?" Silence. Then a whisper. "They know why I'm here." My stomach twisted. Who? She didn't answer, but suddenly her eyes snapped to something behind me. I turned, and for the first time I saw one of them, one of the guests, standing at the end of the hall. Too tall, too thin, a silhouette darker than the shadows around it. Its head was tilted too far, its face blank. No eyes, no mouth, just smooth, featureless skin stretched over bone. It twitched, taking a jerky step forward. The lights flickered. And then another one appeared, and another, stepping out of the rooms, emerging from the darkness, surrounding me. The woman in room 9 grabbed my wrist, yanking me inside just as the lights went out. I didn't fight her. I didn't question it. Because for the first time since I started this job, I knew one thing for certain. I was never supposed to leave this motel. The woman's grip was like ice, her nails digging into my skin as she slammed the door shut. "Turn off the light," she hissed. I barely had time to react before she reached past me and twisted the lamp switch. The room plunged into darkness. My pulse pounded in my ears as we stood there, barely breathing. Then the footsteps started. Slow, uneven, right outside the door. I wanted to move, to hide, to do something, but the woman squeezed my wrist tighter, her silent warning clear. "Don't." The floorboards creaked. Something was standing outside. The doorknob twitched. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to stay still. The darkness pressed against me, heavy and suffocating. I could hear it breathing. Or maybe that was the woman. Or maybe it was something else. Then something slid under the door. A shadow, long, stretching across the carpet like fingers curling towards my feet. I felt a cold, unnatural pull, like it was trying to drag me closer. My breath hitched as I took a tiny step back, but the second I moved, the shadow snapped towards me. The woman clamped a hand over my mouth before I could scream, her voice barely a whisper. "Don't speak. Don't speak. It can't see you unless you let it." The shadow twitched, hesitated, and then it retracted. The footsteps retreated, slow and deliberate. The door creaked as something leaned against it, its weight pressing against the wood, and I could feel it there, waiting. Minutes passed, maybe hours, and then nothing. It was gone. The woman finally let go of me, and I sucked in a ragged breath. "What the hell was that?" I whispered. She didn't answer at first, just walked to the window and peeled back the curtain an inch, peering outside. Then she whispered 3 words that made my stomach drop. "You saw them." I didn't respond. I didn't know how to respond. She turned to face me, her sunken eyes full of something like pity. "You shouldn't have come to this place." I didn't have a choice. Her expression darkened. "None of us did." Something about the way she said that made my skin crawl. I took a shaky breath. "What are they?" "They don't have a name. Not one we can say." "That doesn't make any sense." "How long have you been working here?" 3 nights. Her face twisted with something like grief. "That's too long." My stomach clenched. "What do you mean?" She gestured toward the door. "Did you notice? The ones who check in?" I nodded slowly. "They don't leave." "Neither do the employees." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I shook my head. "No, the manager, he leaves every morning." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Does he?" The room felt colder. A horrible thought crept into my mind. The manager was always gone when I arrived, always back before dawn. I thought about the security cameras, the flickering static, the way some guests just stood in front of their doors, staring, unmoving. The way the motel seemed bigger at night, the hallways stretching longer than they should. "What is this place?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached into her pocket and pulled out something small, pressing it into my hand. A room key. But not just any key. It was old, rusted, the number worn away. The metal was ice cold, like it had been sitting in a freezer. "What is this?" Her voice was hollow. "The key to the real exit." My blood ran cold. "There is no front door. Not really. That thing you walk through every night, it just brings you back in." I wanted to deny it, to argue, but deep down, I felt the truth in her words. I gripped the key tighter. And then the hallway light flickered. The air shifted. The woman went pale. They know I told you." A deep, rattling click echoed from the hallway, like every door was unlocking. And then the motel came alive. The walls groaned, the ceiling trembled, shadows leaked from under the door. The air was thick with the sound of something moving, countless bodies shifting, twitching, crawling. The woman grabbed my arm. "Run!" The door burst open, and I saw all of them. Not just the guests, but the manager. Something else. Something that had been waiting for me since the moment I arrived. And then the lights went out. The lights died. Total darkness swallowed the room, thick and suffocating, pressing against my skin like damp earth. I couldn't see my own hands, couldn't tell if my eyes were open or shut, but I felt them. The guests, now standing in the doorway, waiting. A sound crawled through the dark. Bones popping, joints twisting, something wet and wrong shifting closer. A whisper right next to my ear. "Where do you think you're going?" Cold breath slid across my neck and I bolted. The woman grabbed my wrist, yanking me forward as we ran. I couldn't see, but she seemed to know where to go. My feet pounded against the carpet. The motel warping around us. The hallways stretching, doors multiplying, the air thick with the scent of rot and something metallic like blood. The sounds behind us grew louder, faster. The guests were following, moving with that horrible, jerky twitching like broken marionettes, their two long limbs scraping against the walls. Where are we going? The stairs! We turned a corner, and suddenly there they were. The stairs to the second floor. Except there was no second floor. I stopped short. What the hell? I had seen this motel from the outside. It was one story, no stairs, no upper level. But here they were, a long, spiraling staircase disappearing into the dark above us. "Come on!" she hissed, pulling me up the steps. I didn't fight her. As we climbed, the motel shifted around us. The walls grew taller, the air colder. The fluorescent lights flickered, casting shadows that moved on their own. A voice slithered through the dark. "You don't belong here." It was everywhere. Behind us, above us, inside my own head. And then a hand shot out from between the steps. Thin, gray, fingers too long, clawing at my ankle. I kicked hard. The thing screeched, a high warbling sound like a skipping record. The woman yanked me up the last of the few steps, and suddenly, we weren't in the motel anymore. We were somewhere else. The air changed the second we stepped off the stairs. It was wrong. It was heavy. We stood in a narrow hallway lined with doors, hundreds of them, more than the hotel could possibly hold. They stretched endlessly in both directions, each door identical, wooden, numbered in brass. "This isn't real," I whispered. The woman ignored me, marching forward with quick, purposeful steps. "Stay close. Don't touch the doors." I followed, my heart hammering. The hallway was dead silent except for our footsteps, but I could feel something behind the doors, watching and listening. Then, as we passed room 209, knuckles rapped against the wood. I froze. The woman grabbed my arm, yanking me forward. "Don't stop." Another door knocked, and then another. The sound spread like a wave, growing faster, more frantic, dozens, no, hundreds of fists hammering against the wood. The hallway shook. The doors rattled in their frames, and then one swung open. A long, pale arm shot out, fingers grasping, nails splintering as they dug into the floor. Then the rest of the thing followed. A thing crawling out on too many limbs, its head lolling, mouth yawning open in a soundless scream. We ran. The hallway stretched, growing louder, the doors warping and pulsing like breathing flesh. The lights flickered wildly, casting grotesque shifting shadows that didn't match our movements. Something was chasing us, and I didn't dare look back. Then the woman stopped. I skidded to a halt beside her. "What the hell are you doing? Keep moving!" She didn't respond. She was staring at a door that was different from the others. Black. No number, no handle. "The exit," she breathed. I didn't ask questions. I reached for the key she had given me earlier, shoved it into the lock, and twisted. The door screamed. Not a creak, not a groan. A full, shrieking wail as if the wood itself was alive. The air turned ice cold. The motel shuddered, the hallway collapsing inward. And then the door swung open, and on the other side, there was nothing. A black void stretching endlessly. Cold air pulled at me, dragging me toward it like a gaping mouth ready to swallow me whole. The woman grabbed my wrist. "This is the only way out." I stared into the darkness. My stomach twisted with a primal, gut-wrenching fear. Something waited in that void. Something worse than the guests The hallway behind us collapsed, doors crumbling into the walls, shadows surging forward like a living thing. We had seconds to decide. Stay into the motel, or step into the unknown. And then the blackness reached for us. The darkness pulled. Not like gravity, not like wind. This was different. It felt alive, wrapping around my limbs, dragging me forward without touching me. The woman clutched my wrist. "Jump!" she hissed. My body refused. My mind screamed no. Every instinct I had told me that stepping into that void meant never coming back. Behind us, the motel collapsed, walls warping, floors splitting open like something beneath it was trying to crawl out. The guests, if they were ever really guests, were moving towards us in unnatural twitching jerks, their heads snapping side to side like broken puppets. And then the manager appeared. Not walking, not running. He was just there, right in front of us. His eyes were completely black now, no whites, no pupils. His face shifted, like it was made of something liquid. "You were doing so well," he said, voice smooth, empty. "You almost made it." The shadows moved around him, curling at his feet like smoke. I grit my teeth. "What the hell is this place?" The woman tightened her grip on my wrist. "Don't listen to him. Jump!" The manager tilted his head too far, the skin at his neck stretching like wax. "Where do you think that door leads?" he said, gesturing back to the void. "Do you think it's an exit?" A cold dread settled in my stomach. He smiled, too wide. "There's no leaving, kid. Not through there. Not through anywhere." I didn't want to believe him, but something deep inside me did. The woman pulled me hard toward the void. "He's lying. If we stay, we become them." I turned back to the manager. His smile had disappeared. The guests surged forward. I had no choice. I jumped, and everything went black, falling. Not fast, not slow, just endless. But the darkness wasn't empty. It whispered. Not words, just sounds. Wet, clicking, distant voices, laughter that wasn't laughter. I tried to scream. My mouth wouldn't open. The woman beside me was falling, her hair whipping around her face, and her eyes met mine, and I saw fear. Not the kind you get when you're scared of the dark. The kind you get when you realize you've made a mistake. And we stopped. Not like landing. There was no impact. No jolt. Just suddenly we were somewhere else. I sucked in a sharp breath. My lungs burned. My body felt wrong. Like I had been turned inside out and stitched back together. I blinked. Light. Dim, flickering. The glow of a neon sign. The buzzing was the first thing I'd recognized. Then the hum of an old air conditioning unit. The sound of a TV playing something unintelligible. I was in a motel office. Not the same one, but almost the same one. The Moonlight Motel sign outside wasn't flickering anymore. It glowed a sickly red, the letters shifting slightly, like they were trying to spell something else. The woman sat beside me, breathing hard. "No, no, 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 no! We were supposed to get out!" I swallowed thickly. Maybe we did. She turned to look at me. "Does this look like out to you?" I didn't answer, because outside in the parking lot, there were cars. Not abandoned, not rusted, running, idling, full of people who looked normal. A man leaned against a truck smoking a cigarette. A woman adjusted her mirror in a silver sedan. A couple dragged suitcases toward the front door. It looked like a real motel. like any motel. Except for one thing. The manager was still behind the desk. Not the same one, not exactly, but he looked right at me and smiled. Like he knew me. Like he had been waiting. A sick realization curdled in my stomach. I turned to the woman. She was staring at the guest log on the counter. Her hands were shaking. I stepped closer and looked over her shoulder. And there they were. Our names, written neatly in black ink. Checked in, but never checked out. The woman stepped back. This isn't real. This isn't real. My head felt light, the air too thick. I turned back to the window, staring at the parking lot. And that's when I saw it. One of the guests. A woman standing near the vending machines, still, too still. Not blinking, not moving. And then her face shifted, just for a second. Like something else was underneath it. Wearing it. And I realized none of these people were real. None of them had ever left. And neither would we. I couldn't breathe. The woman clutched my arm so tight it hurt, her nails digging into my skin. She was still staring at the guest log, her breath coming in shallow gasps. We never left. The words hit me like a gut punch. I wanted to deny it. I wanted to say something logical, something rational, but I couldn't. Because I knew she was right. The parking lot, the guests, the manager, it was all too perfect. The motel looked normal, but I had already seen what was beneath the surface. And so had she. We have to go, I whispered. She nodded, snapping out of her daze. We turned toward the door, and he was standing there. The manager. Not behind the desk this time, but blocking the exit. His eyes bore into me, and his smile stretched just a little too wide. Leaving? So soon? His voice was calm, casual, as if we hadn't just fallen through a nightmare. The woman grabbed my wrist, pulling me towards the side door, and I didn't hesitate. We ran. Through the hall, past the guests, things in human skin, their faces flickering as they turned towards us, their eyes vacant, watching. We burst through the emergency exit and into the parking lot. The cars were gone. The people were gone. The world outside the motel was wrong. The road stretched forever. A perfect, unbroken black highway vanishing into an empty, starless sky. No moon, no streetlights, no sound. I turned in a slow circle, my breath turning to ice in my chest. We were alone. The woman grabbed my shoulders. There has to be a way out. I nodded because I had to believe it. But then, the neon sign flickered. I turned toward it, my stomach twisting. It no longer said Moonlight Motel. The letters shifted, warping, buzzing, rearranging themselves into something new. A single word. Stay. And the front door swung open, and the guests began to step outside. Slow, jerky, twitching like broken dolls. Their heads twisted unnaturally, their smiles stretching too far. The manager walked out last, hands in his pockets. He looked at us with something close to amusement. You can run, but you'll only come back. I swallowed hard. My skin crawled. What do you mean? I asked, though deep down I already knew. His smile widened. You've always been here. The world lurched. The motel blinked, flickering, stretching, glitching like a dying signal. The parking lot melted into the lobby, the sky folded into wallpaper, and suddenly, we were inside again, standing at the front desk. The guest log was open. 2 new names written inside. Mine and hers. Checked in. never checked out. My head spun. I reached for the door again, but it wasn't there anymore. Just hallways. Endless hallways stretching out where the exit should have been. The floor throbbed beneath my feet, the walls warped like breathing flesh. The woman shook her head violently. No, 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 this can't be real. But it was. The manager leaned against the counter, watching us with mild curiosity. You don't get it, do you? There's no out. No escape. No waking up. His black eyes glittered. This place is a mouth, and it already swallowed you. I backed away. That's bullshit. If we got in, we can get out. He chuckled. You never got in. He tapped the guest log. You've always been here. I turned to the woman. We're leaving. She nodded quickly. We're leaving. We took off down the hall, but the motel moved with us. The walls stretched. The lights flickered. The air grew thicker, like we were running through something alive. Doors opened on their own, revealing things that weren't human. Figures standing in the dark, their faces melting, their eyes watching. And then a room door swung open in front of us. Room 9. Our room. The one we had never left. Inside, the TV was on, playing static. The bed was made, and on the pillows were 2 perfect imprints, like someone had been lying there just seconds ago. I froze and my stomach dropped. The woman's breath hitched. No. She turned to me, her eyes wide and hollow. We're still in the bed. The words barely left her lips before the walls collapsed inward. The motel shrieked, the floor split open, and I saw something beneath it all. Endless rooms, endless hallways, a never-ending maze of twisting, shifting spaces. The truth hit me all at once. This wasn't a motel. It was a trap. A place that pulled people in, that made them forget, that kept them running forever, searching for a way out that never existed. The guests weren't people. They were the ones who stopped running. And now, we were becoming them. The last thing I heard was the manager's voice. Calm, smooth, final. Welcome home.